Hi, everybody. This is Teresa Sullivan saying hello from Olympia, Washington. Sam Norgard and Anvi Shah asked me to talk about my work for you guys, and I'm really thrilled that anybody's actually interested in that. So I am glad to be here, and I'm grateful for their invitation. I'll start with, well, what I do. This is my hands in the process of doing beadwork. These hands really should be a video so you can see the hands going back and forth over and over hundreds of times, but it's a still photo. It's good for a start. And I will start with where I'm from. I'm from a lot of places. I was born in Toledo, Ohio. I don't remember Toledo, Ohio. We lived in Lambertville, Michigan, which is right across the state border from Toledo, Ohio, when I was also very, very young. And then when I was a month old, we moved to Lima, Ohio. Then when I was, I think, 9 months old, I moved with my family to the Portland, Oregon area. Then my dad decided to go back and get a master's degree, so we moved to California, where he got one at UC Berkeley. Then I do remember living in Mankato, Minnesota. So we've been different places. By the time I started first grade, we were in Phoenix, and we were actually there for 6 whole years. Another interesting thing about my origins is that within a few months after I was born, my family adopted my 2 brothers. So for me, they were there from day one, just about. And they kind of looked like us. They were white people. They had brown hair and brown eyes, pretty much, or hazel eyes. But they kept their real last names. So like many Americans, I have lived in a whole bunch of different places. I have family members that are not technically blood relatives, but they feel like family. So what can I say? I've got some original backgrounds here going here. It was a bit tumultuous, I'll say. And I had periods of alone, very valuable alone time, which I mostly used by reading and drawing hundreds and hundreds of pictures. We also had just lots of people in the house. We had guests from overseas. We had a friend of my oldest brother's who was not having a good time in his house, so we took him into our house for a little while. Then I became an auntie at age 10, so that's my adorable nephew down in the stroller there, and my middle brother and my dad. And so it was, pretty varietal. And it kind of gave me, I'll say, a sense of the arbitrariness of family bloodline and the arbitrariness of being from a certain place. Hopefully I've made use of that as an artist. When I was about 12, my parents divorced, and the brother that you see in this picture and I and my mom moved to back to the Portland, Oregon area. Since then, I've been in the Pacific Northwest. And maybe one of the things that all this tumult begot was a bit of a smart aleckiness. This is a piece I made. I don't know how readable the lettering is, but it's, depending on how you want to pronounce it, artisanal, the word depicted in this neck piece. Much of my inspiration comes from comic books and what they call now mid-century pulp fiction artwork, and just fantastic stuff, imagination stuff, things that blow me away, things that make you say, oh my gosh, how did they think that up? And yes, there are artists out there who are, to me at least, mind-blowing. One of them I encountered in a comic book that was centered on all cars and motorcycles. And this artist, when I this one artist really stood out. And I mentioned him to my now husband, and he goes, "Oh, that's nothing. You should see him in Zap Comics." So hilarity ensued. I was like, what's Zap Comics all about? Well, it's a late 60s underground comics that was kind of inspired by earlier weird stuff, fun and weird. My husband is the dark-haired guy at the wheel of the car. I'm in the middle. Our drummer's in the passenger seat there. I'm also a musician, and music and irreverence also go hand in hand in my world anyway. At the time I developed an interest in beads and then later beadwork, I was working in a tile factory, and it sounds like it might be a creative profession. It could be. It wasn't always. There was a lot of grunt work involved. Needless to say, I was dissatisfied. At first, I just joined, hired on, figuring, well, I'll just do my music and have a job that sustains me while I'm being a musician. But I missed the artwork that I had been doing as a kid, and I didn't really have a medium that, other than making posters for a band, that really gripped me. But luckily, I belatedly, at age roughly 25, finally had my ears pierced. I happened to live near walking distance from a bead store, and I started making little earrings. A coworker gave me a gift of a little box of beads that she didn't want anymore, and off I went. I joined the Portland, Oregon Bead Society, and I started learning about all these incredible things that just happen to have holes in them. And remember, anything with a hole in it is a bead. I discovered more and more things about beads, the history of the trade beads. And honestly, when you think about trade, when people say trade beads, they usually mean big chunky beads that are fantastic pieces of art on their own. I also consider trade beads to include seed beads because, well, seed beads were traded all around the world. Now, at first, I respected seed bead work, but it didn't grip me the way it did until I saw and encountered Joyce Jane Scott's beadwork. At first, I was seeing just, lovely amulet bags and very nice Victoriana or Neo-Victoriana and wonderful native work. People from South Africa, people from West Africa, mostly trade beads in West Africa, people from Kenya doing those incredible, and the Maasai and the Dinka people of Kenya and Tanzania. And of course, the incredible work that people right here near me do in America. But it was basically what I saw in Joyce's work lit me on fire, as it drew me in because it just made me think of all those wonderful Zap comic irreverence, underground comics kind of things and weird monsters kind of stuff. So off I went. I did learn, took a 2-day workshop in beadwork from Joyce Scott, and that kept me busy for 10 years. This is a piece that I made where I was still working at the tile factory, and I integrated packing material. All these pieces of colorful magazine were sandwiched between the tiles. So I started setting them aside and just going, I'll use them for something. I'm seeing a theme here. The theme was connection and travel and just granular things. Even the guy back here with the arm that's covered in sweaty oil. I think is a picture of somebody working on an oil derrick or something, or in the oil fields. emblematized just the idea of the flow of particles through our lives and through the world. And there's a skull on the right-hand side of this picture. Our skulls are beads. When we die, we leave behind a skull, that we leave behind bones that are literally have holes in them. And therefore, in my book, that qualifies them as to be beads. And this is done in right angle weave. I confess that although David Chatt, from whom I had the privilege of taking a class, generally recommends or even insists that people use round seed beads. In other words, the traditional Czech or whatever seed beads. I confess I use some delicate beads, which are kind of the opposite of that type of bead, just to see if I could do it. And I didn't explode. Don't tell David, okay? And yes, I was pursuing art, working full-time at a sweaty factory. A tile factory is nice in the wintertime when it's cold outside, but in the summertime, it's hotter than the temperature outside. And there is no air conditioning in a tile factory. So I was wanting to leave the tile factory as soon as possible and be an artist full-time. And it took some time, but I did it. This and the last figure are hollow form pieces. They're made with peyote stitch, which incorporates many different shaping techniques. They're a little squishy, but they do hold up their shape on their own due to the thread tension of the beads and the way the beads are woven together. I did take a workshop from Joyce Scott, let's see, about 6 years later, I took a week-long workshop on creating beaded figures through the University of Minnesota Split Rock Arts program. And that was just a wonderful week. And yes, I try to tell stories I tell stories with what I do. Some people would probably say that I really put my heart into it. This is also a hollow piece created with the same types of shaping techniques with which the figures are made. And back to some of my inspirations. This particularly was a huge an inspiration for several pieces that I did. I first, cartooning style, did a flat piece. I started at the bottom of the piece. I made a strip of beads and I just laid down the piece of beadwork on top of this magazine as I worked. I also did it in 3D. I'll show you that later. But I want to make a point about the basic condition of this comic book or this magazine. These were meant to be thrown away. These were meant to be just here today, gone tomorrow. That cost $0.25. It had a whole bunch of stories in it. People who wrote for these magazines were paid pennies per word for their stories. And many actual famous writers, or writers who became prosperous later, had their start writing stories for throwaway magazines like these. The reason why they're called throwaway magazines because they weren't really valued. It was just looked at as pop culture, who cares, whatever kind of stuff. Luckily, some of these survived. You can see even the cover was made of such cheap material that 50 years down the line, it's falling apart. But interestingly, since then, people started appreciating the artwork on them. I'm not the only one, I suppose. This figure, as you can see, was inspired by that previous magazine. Planet Stories has the best covers. You can buy that magazine cover as a poster now. All those mothers who threw their kids' comic books away, oh well. Some of it survived at least. One client of mine also likes those old pulp science fiction magazines, and it was pulp because they used pulp paper, the cheapest paper available to create these magazines, to print these magazines on. And she loves them. I love them. She saw my website. She asked me to interpret that into a wearable neck piece. So I used that same type of tapestry technique for the figure on the piece. And I improvised with the rest. The neck piece goes back behind the neck as a continuous strip of beadwork, and it actually clasps in front. It's kind of easy to wear that way. Another Planet Stories magazine, they're among my top #1 favorite magazine for graphics, is a figure somewhat like this. On the original magazine, there's a topless alien lady with kind of elf-like ears, red hair, green skin, and checkered pants, who's riding a space Vespa, and she's being chased by monsters in their space Vespas. So had to commemorate it. Not only that, what really excited me about seeing the checkered pants lady is that one of my favorite characters from Zap Comics is a character called the Checkered Demon by S. Clay Wilson. And I thought, well, this magazine, Planet Stories, came out, 10 or more years before the Checkered Demon character was launched onto the world. So I thought, wow, it's the Checkered Demon's mom. I gotta bead her too. I gotta make her in beads, I should say. Not all my pieces are, strictly fun and games or directly derived from pulp science fiction or pulp fiction. This is a piece called Generosity, Generosity. It's based on a story a friend told us, my husband and I, about a record. I mean, I'm talking a vinyl LP album that was becoming collectible, and because it was collectible, the price was going up on it. And this mutual friend of ours had 2 copies of it, and he was a rock and roll guy, and he was just kind of a wacky guy, and he was basically incensed that this album, and I'll reveal the name to you, it was the MC5 original Kick Out the Jams album with the uncensored liner notes, or the uncensored song on it, where the singer impassionedly sings, "Kick out the jams," and I won't say the word, but it's a word that you're not supposed to say on the record, on a recording, at least in 1969 when the record came out. So he hears about this record just shooting up in value. This is back in the days of vinyl. You can't stream anything. It's before the internet. And he's incensed because it's getting unaffordable. So, you could buy that record in the 25-cent record bin back in the day, but no. So he, in response to that, and he's like working out of town, but he's got his records with him, and he doesn't even know people. And he just grabs one of the 2 copies of this records he has out of his collection, walks down the street, maybe he goes to a bar, I don't know, and he just gives it to the next person he sees that he thinks might like it, in an act of generosity in the generic city. That's why I call it Generosity, Generosity. And just by chance, he runs into the guy to whom he gave the record, and the guy's just ecstatic. He's thrilled. He's going, "Oh my God, you changed my life with this great music here." So that's got to be commemorated. So I've got a big hand. Going back, there is a clasp at the back of this piece. Going up one side is a bunch of different kind of city style buildings, or things representing city buildings. And there's like a small piece, you can just barely see it up there, which is a flat facial face, kind of with a generic barcodes for a mouth. So he brought a little less, he busted out of the generic aspect of the city with his act of generosity. This piece was actually started as a result of a failure. And, recent college graduates with crippling amounts of debt probably don't want to hear people go, oh, you should just fail upward. Failing is great. You can fail and you can learn so much from it. It's like, okay, enough with the failure. But this is a failure that worked out story. What happened was I had a class for which not enough people signed up. So I was stuck at home, out of town with some beads. So I began working on this necklace while listening to the radio because I'm a musician, right? And I had no idea how it would turn out. I was kind of bummed out because nobody had signed up for, or not enough people had signed up for the class to make it go, etc. So, but I just thought, okay, well, I get some time alone to bead. Great. While I was beading, I heard a discussion of what they call Miami rice, which is a term for US rice that happens to be subsidized and therefore prices can be low, that was exported from Miami, from the US to Haiti. So we were selling rice to Haiti at very low cost. Their farmers couldn't compete with the US rice, so they stopped producing the rice themselves. And then the price of gas went up. So the cost of the rice shot up with the cost of transporting it. Sound familiar? And all of a sudden, people could not afford to buy food in Haiti. And they were literally eating mud just to have the feeling of having something in their stomach. So I gotta have thought, okay, I'm going to commemorate that too. So this piece is called Miami Rice. It's had empty bowls in it. And it's actually turned out to be the first major piece that I sold to somebody. So I didn't get to teach the class, but I did get to sell the necklace a couple of years down the line. And here's a detail. I'm using multiple techniques here: peyote stitch with shaping, right angle weave for the backdrop. I like to combine techniques for texture. Another story, a little more whimsical, but still a little mysterious, is this piece is called Don't Tell Fred. I go to estate sales a lot, or I used to when I lived in Portland, and I found a necklace, one of those wonderful flapper era 20s necklace of glass beads. It's long and has a tassel at the end. And I thought, oh, okay, cool. Hey, cool vintage beads. But it came with a note, and the note said, Lenore, here are insider beads from tassel, because one of the tassels was missing, had to come apart after 80 plus years. Maybe you can fix it. I have other jewelry of hers for the kids if you like them. But then at the end of them, it says, but don't tell Fred that I gave you the necklace. When you write to me, don't mention anything about getting the necklace. And I thought, whoa, what's going on here? Did Fred ever find out? So had to weave around that story. And I like to free associate sometimes, and I just thought that figure, this is one of those, it's just a tin toy type thing, a flat thing, and it's got these like birds on it, and it's kind of represents the fool, and maybe messages going through the air or not, or enigmatic stuff. So I thought, okay, I got to incorporate that piece in it. That tin figure did not have a hole in it, and I didn't want to poke a hole into it, so I just kind of roped them in. I just kind of beaded them into the piece. This piece took a long time to make, but I thought it was worth doing. I have a record album by a band that I like, and I adapted the image in the piece from the cover of that record album. I have too much Catholic girl guilt to just Xerox it. I didn't want to, you know, openly just copy it. So I just took colored pencils and drew it, semi-traced it, drew it on a big piece of paper and got it to reduced it to the size that I wanted and started beading. And if you've ever heard of the cartooning technique of, I believe it's the Navajo Native peoples in northern Arizona, they will weave in front of a board with the designs on it. So as they weave, they know what color when to switch colors. I did something somewhat similar, just as with the Planet Stories piece, the flat piece. I simply started at the bottom, beaded back and forth, and whenever I did not know what color I should do, I laid the beadwork actually down on the drawing. I didn't pixel it out. I'm on the pooter enough already. I didn't want to spend extra time pixeling it out on the computer. Plus it's something I learned from Joyce Scott. You know, you can do that. It's not as hard as it sounds. And it gives you a certain amount of, a lot more freedom when you can do it that way. This is a close-up of that piece. I used a 3-count peyote stitch. So you're putting on 3 beads at a time, skipping 3 beads and passing through the next 3 beads. It's a lot faster than single bead. Plus you can get, the nice thing is you can get more of a diagonal or gradual, a gradual sloping line with that technique. So I had an opportunity to do a solo exhibit at Mesa Arts Center in Arizona in 2010. I had a room that I could fill with things I'd done. And I knew I kind of didn't want to screw up the opportunity. So maybe I did screw it up. I don't know. I chose the theme of crafts, where the place craft occupies in the hierarchy of the art world, which, as you can imagine, I don't take all that seriously. Even within the art world, there is hierarchy and shenanigans and craziness. So I thought, okay, why don't I start by looking up the term craft in an etymological dictionary and find out why we think craft is so crappy. Well, it turns out because that's what the word craft comes from, is the word craft. In fact, it's an onomatopoeic word, which is the sound of maybe an anvil striking a sword, or a hammer striking a sword on an anvil. So I thought, hey, why don't I play with that idea and lampoon it a bit? Frankly, with our language, we can turn anything into a different thing. Back in the day, 2,000 years ago, painting and sculpture were considered basically at the lower echelons of the art, were barely even considered art. Music and poetry was considered art because you had to be literate and your inspiration was divine, especially with the poetry, especially with the music. You could literally be, you didn't have to be able to read to create objects. And those objects generally imitated nature or replicated nature. They weren't considered completely coming out of divine whatever. So it took painters literally centuries to elevate their art to be considered art. Especially one of the techniques they used was by saying that it was divinely inspired. So whatever works, folks. So I called this exhibit Station Identification. And I had, each corner of the room had a theme to it. The first theme, as you entered on the left, was all black and white objects and hangy-dangy things. Actually, I should call them I call them post-atomic bell pulls, after the idea that the Victorian era bell pulls were, again, a craft that was not, it was just decorative. It didn't have divine inspiration. It was done by upper middle class ladies, so they were not edgy. They supposedly didn't have ideas. They just did things to be nice and tame or whatever, right? And these post-atomic bell pulls in the first corner were all black and white, symbolizing the idea that it's an either or thing. It's either craft or art. It's either this or that. The second corner that you can see at your left in the picture with the fabric, green fabric pieces coming down, is the corner that exemplifies the idea that it's just a pastime, just like for the upper middle class ladies of Victorian England with the bell pulls. It's just something for nice, quiet, domesticated ladies to do. The third corner that of which you can only see a couple pieces here, had to do with, oh, it's just craft. It's just it's guys do it. They get the hammer and saw out and they build something, and they don't have to have a brain to be able to do that, allegedly. Then the final corner was kind of circusy and lewd and borderline lewd and red garish things, which is, if all else fails, just call it garish and lewd. So these are some of those post-atomic bell pulls all arranged together. They're done in a tubular endobelly, or also known as herringbone weave, and they're done improvisationally. And each one, although they're mixed together here, contains the color scheme that goes with each corner in the exhibit. I did these improvisational pieces to go with each corner as well. I love collage and I love found objects, and boy, do I have a lot of found objects and collage material at home. So I did string them. So I either made use of beads or made something into beads or beaded around it. But again, it involves, there's a pamphlet at the bottom here called "Can I Be a Craftsman?" And it's basically a pamphlet probably from about 1960 from General Motors saying, don't like your English class, do okay in math, work for GM, work with your hands, and it has to do with that whole, back 2,000 years ago, they had enslaved people working on paintings and sculpture, doing the grunt work, under the direction of the creator, And on the left here, we've got this, a box that basically was a bead kit, and it has these two very domestic, tame looking ladies on the cover of it. And, I just thought why not just bring it out in the open and lampoon it and hopefully generate discussion about it. Close-ups on the post-atomic bell pulls. I do confess that the poker die in there does not have a hole, and I didn't want to drill a hole, so I beaded around it with things with holes. When in doubt, cultivate a weathering sneer. This is actually from an old Mad magazine from before I was even born, but I just thought, cultivate a withering sneer and maybe laugh afterward. Again, as you can probably guess by now, I'm not hugely either dogmatic or necessarily terribly obedient. I'm not somebody who's gonna like scream and throw things necessarily, but I do find, even when I was a very shy teenager, that you could really mess with people by wearing different things. So what can I say? These again are hollow form figures that have nothing inside. Their shape is created by the stitches that I do, the types of shaping techniques that I make. And so many people ask, oh, did you use glue? Oh, do you use wire? Oh, how did you wire that together? And I say, no, it's just beads and thread sewn together, beads sewn to other beads. The one exception is that the framework for this piece is actually an old wire clothes hanger that I deconstructed and beaded around. So that wire is really tough and will last a long time. So I did use wire in that case, but the beads on it are not glued on it. They're sewn around it. And just want to mention too, I'll show you some larger beads from my collection soon. I love the big beads. Big beads are good too. I love anything with a hole in it. Let's face it. The little ones, the big ones, it's great. If it's got a hole in it, I can use it. Even if it doesn't, maybe I can poke a hole in it. This is a close-up of the devil lady. The piece is called Advice. Guess who's not taking advice, right? And her trident is, or her pitchfork or whatever you want to call it, that's the sculptural end-to-belly or herringbone technique. The rest is peyote stitch, and the end-to-belly around the frame of the piece too. Same with the musical instrument that the angel is holding. That part is the end-to-belly or herringbone weave, and the rest is peyote stitch. There's a little bit of herringbone on her wings that are in the back. I kind of thought of her as kind of a bimbo-ish angel, so I gave her small wings, but hey, she's got wings. I don't have wings. She's got wings. Now, this is a picture from Cape Town, South Africa, at the headquarters of a place called Monkey Biz. When I was taking Joyce Scott's week-long workshop at Split Rock in Minnesota, I noticed that she had an assistant. And the little light bulb went on over my head, and I thought, at the end of the week, I asked Joyce, hey, if you need an assistant, call me, email me. And a year later, or 6 months later, she said, hey, I'm teaching at Penland School of Crafts this summer. You want to be my assistant? And I said, yes, please. After that, we kept in touch. And so many years later, she asked me to help her assist in teaching at Haystack Mountain School of Crafts, which was wonderful as well. Then a few short years later after that, she asked if I want to go to South Africa. And I said, when do I start packing? And she came in contact with these wonderful, incredible, talented artists group called Monkey Biz in Cape Town, headquartered in Cape Town, who sell their work all over the world. The ladies in the townships, and some men too, basically pick up the supplies on a Friday, work all week, and turn in their work on Friday and get paid. And these are people who live in places with way far away from the city, no job opportunities. They are very often caring for multiple family members, nieces and nephews, because there's a lot of people who have died of AIDS in those areas, and they have a wonderful way to make work, to earn money doing wonderful work and care for the kids at the same time because they're working at home. There's another group called the Abushle artists, and it's a long story, but it's somewhat similar. It's a smaller scale operation, but they do beadwork on bead embroidery on tapestry surfaces, and they do wonderful work. We also went there. They are many hours away, and a couple hours travel north of Durban. And Joyce was in contact with them as well, and she decided, well, why don't I go to South Africa and share my knowledge with these people? She brought 4 other artists as well as myself with her. And we turned into a 12-legged monster, all 6 of us, and just learned so many things. It was incredible. One of the things I really loved was that in this photo, the Monkey Biz artists speak Xhosa, and I'm not pronouncing that right. It's spelled Xhosa, and it's also known as the Click Talk language. We had a translator, a lady who's fluent in multiple languages, and it was just so fun to hear them talk. And they were so wonderful, so just really on the spot. They were doing beadwork that was vastly different in technique than what they were used to. And they just lapped it up. They were just really with it. So it was just, oh boy, I have an entire slideshow talk just on that subject. This is in Durban. These are 3 of these people are artists that from America, and I'll introduce them to you left to right. The lady on the far left is Sonia Clark, who is an incredible artist. You may have heard of herself. Do look her up, please. She is friends and had already known and met this lady, second from left, who lives in Durban. Her name is Shlenge Dube, and she is not only an incredibly talented bead artist, she goes into the countryside and documents who made what they call it, what it looks like, and when it was made, and gathers up the history of the local people's beaded artwork. And her work in all respects is incredible. This lady in the middle in the tan shirt is named Isatou Bay Gricia, and she is primarily an African dancer. She is actually she's also from the Midwest, but she grew up since she was a teenager in Harlem, and she studied African dance in college. She's spent time in West Africa, and she's incredibly talented. You give her a few phone numbers and she'll have a dance program generated for, like at least an afternoon or 2 within a half an hour. She's phenomenal. This man on the right, now I want to mention that out of the 6 of us, he was the only guy, and I was the only white person in the group. So it was really fun. And he was, believe me, if he can travel with 5 women for that period of time, it's a testimony to his equilibrium, let's say. He is an incredibly talented artist, and he works with people. He works with children and old people. In South Africa, he and Isatou brought children together. He did a program with children in the townships while Joyce and I taught at Monkey Biz. And it was, again, this is a whole subject for another talk, but he's wonderful as well. We spent time with Lenge, and she was just wise and just so fun. We shared techniques. Oh boy. So by now I reworked these pieces. By now I'm starting to feel a little less constricted. I'm not working at the tile factory 40 plus hours a week. I'm having more time to spend on beads and beadwork. I took these 2 figures that you saw earlier and refashioned them into I think I call this emergence or something like that. I had been feeling like the lady in the cage, the blue lady. I'm starting to feel like the yellow lady a bit more as time goes on. And I thought, why don't I show you the way I work? I just use a white ceramic plate and a dinner plate. I let my beads mingle. One thing that I like about this is that you really see how beads behave together when they're together. It's hard to tell when you have your beads when they're sold to you in a little tube of beads or whatever, what they're going to look like when they're actually woven together. This gives you a better idea. Another thing, I decided to do a little taste test, so to speak. I thought I'd find out how much impact the computer, how distracting the computer can be when you're working on beads. So one day I thought, okay, I'm going to bead all afternoon. I'm going to bead from this time period to that time period, and I'm not going to allow myself to be on the computer. And then I'm going to do that, but I am going to allow myself to just go over to the computer and look something up. And that's the difference it made. The piece on the left was I made in the same exact time period when I allowed myself to be distracted, and the piece on the right is what I did when I did not allow myself to be distracted. Not that the pooter is bad. Obviously, it's invaluable for communication and teaching purposes and learning things. But when you want to get the work done, turn that phone off, folks. The other thing that I encounter that many people encounter is creative blocks. These might not look like it. These might look like, oh my God, what was she thinking? But I decided, okay, if I'm blocked, and I kind of was after I came back from South Africa, a couple of incidents occurred when I got back home that were not fun, and I just kind of froze, I think. So I decided, why don't I just do things without caring what the result is? And this is some of that stuff. What happens when you do that is you might come up with something that may or may not be functional, may or may not be beautiful by some people's standards, but you teach yourself things that are useful in other things that might be more, quote, beautiful, and end quote. This piece is a representation of La Lupe. It's just from a photo of her. She's a Cuban singer, and she just had just such a wonderful smile, and they caught a picture of her laughing, and it was just so evocative. This is actually a brooch. I actually manufactured my own little metal pin back for it. And yes, when I talk about power, I'm talking about, I think it's the Tao Te Ching says, he who conquers others is strong, but he who conquers himself is stronger yet. That's the kind of power I'm talking about. And yes, this is just some beads from my collection because I like to gather up things of all different shapes, sizes, colors. There's a color scheme going on somewhat in this. I also like paper. Paper goods are wonderful for collage purposes, and they can say so much. I also, let's see, before I went to South Africa, I got to go I had the privilege of visiting the Czech Republic. I was with my then boss at the time, the first time. The second time I was with a lady who was sent over to basically scout out more supplies for a different business. And I was kind of her driver because I'd been there and I knew the area. What we did when we went over there, besides shopping for beads, of course, was we were allowed into the factories to see people not only making beads, but in this case, making buttons. This guy has been making buttons since he was 18, and he was 60 years old at the time of this photo. And he was in a tiny little house The heat in the house was provided by the gas-fired kiln that is to your right that you can't see. Those are glass rods that are sticking into the open furnace. And he's been making buttons for 48 years. In Czech Republic, in the northern part, they have entire towns dedicated to the production of, say, rhinestones, or the production of nothing but Christmas ornaments, the entire town, except for, you know, the bar owner and the grocery store owner. This was an antique store with beads in it, and boy was I excited to get to visit this place. The 2 trips I made to the Czech Republic are both also subjects of separate slide talks. The funny thing is, the Czechs will make basically any shape of bead you want. They make rosaries, they make prayer beads for Islamic cultures. They make rosary beads for all the major religions, basically, that use rosary beads. And they'll make pressed glass Buddhas, Buddha faces as well. The variety is intense. It's just wonderful. Again, if it has a hole in it, it's a bead. One thing I also was very privileged to experience was the first couple of bead summits at what Kate McKinnon called the Atomic Ranch in Tucson. I got to meet Gene Power and Marcia DeCoster and Gabriella and Jeroen Van Diepen, and some just wonderful people that Kate gathered up. And we spent like a long weekend just talking and teaching each other things and just having quite a lot of fun. That's my white ceramic plate on which I do my beadwork in between my hands there. And you'll notice it's elevated, it's not on the table. That's because I don't want to get the bead equivalent of Technic. If you elevate your work, you're not going to have a sore neck at the end of the day. And this is Jean with the kind of blurry with the glasses, facing away from the camera. And this is another participant who was, I caught her and I caught her laughing. She was just really fun. And she's wearing a bathing suit, if that, it's hard to tell, but I just want to make sure you know that she's fully clothed. There was a pool there. That was fun. It's the first time in probably a decade that I actually was in a swimming pool. So that was nice too. What came about as a result of the Bead Summit was the geometric beadwork projects, and that both Kate and Gene Power have done. What I brought to it was not geometric, but in this piece, I combined a geometric beadwork technique as well as a technique, an increasing and decreasing techniques that I learned from Joyce Scott. And I combined them in an organized fashion, as you can see. The geometric beadwork is also wonderfully exemplified by things that Diane Fitzgerald has done. And back in the day, Julia Prettle had I think in 1999, a book came out called Little Boxes by Julia Prettle that has that same technique. And you can see just with basically one idea, you can do a cajillion things, which is again, where that connection comes from. We had people, Gene Powers from London, England. Kate brought a bunch of people who are originally from Holland, who lived in Chicago, who went to Tucson, and people from California, people from Georgia. We're connecting all around little tiny things that have holes in them. And the point I want to make about the connection is that the hole, the empty space, is what allows for that connection. This is the same type of thing, only different beads. Totally different look, but it just shows how diverse things are in the bead world here. I originally met Kate at a Portland Bead Society bead bazaar, and I was wearing flame cuffs. I should be wearing them right now. I should show them to you. You'll have to check my website. They should be on there. The funny thing was, I am, as you can see, I'm not a like repetitive, like neat and tidy bead person. And a lot of the geometric beadwork is very neat and tidy. It might be horned and so on, but it's not just wiggly, right? Kate asked me to make this piece for the geometric beadwork first book, I think it was, or the second, I don't remember, incorporating the flames. So she actually sent me the Delica beads, because I have a huge bead stash, but not a huge amount of Delicas. And I did a piece with the geometric techniques, and then I branched out with the flames, and I thought, okay, I gotta have these diverse types of beads living together in the same piece. So I've got Delicas and check seed beads in the same piece, not unlike the right angle weave piece with all the magazine slices. It has more than one type of seed bead in there. And they didn't explode. Now, I want to acknowledge it, and not only acknowledge, but praise to the skies all the people who have encouraged me over the years. And this neck piece is a tribute to, kind of a tribute to that. I sometimes have not met with immediate acceptance in terms of what I do with beads. I get a lot of, in a friendly way, I get a lot of, oh my God, what is that? Especially back in the day when, most beadwork that you saw was an adorable little amulet purse or something like that. So, oh my God, what is that was normal for me. But there were enough people, and it would take too long to name the names, and I'd probably start, getting emotional about it. But there are people that didn't do that, who were just like, yeah, do more. So I had to commemorate that. And I just thought I'd show you that the hands, in some people's belief systems, the fingertips actually have energy coming out from them. And of course, we do things with our hands. So all kinds of things can come about with our hands. And so I thought, oh, I'll make some curly cues coming, curly tendrils coming out of the hands. I put a snake in there for curiosity and mystery. I put the blue is kind of like just a river of creativity. And there's, of course, a hand on my shoulder going, yeah, don't give up. Also, hey, I'll show you my studio, which is a corner of my living room. Back here, this is my bead room, where I have the luxury of having a whole room where I can store books, do photography, store beads. But when I bead, I like to be with, generally with my husband, and it's just the two of us here, and near a stereo, near a TV, near music, and near a window for light. There have been times when we had a power outage. We live kind of outside of town, so a lot of tall trees that fall over on power lines. So once in a while you get a power outage, and I can bead if there's enough light, if it's during the day. So it's nice to be able to not have to rely on even electricity if I don't have to for this medium. And again, you can see I'm elevating my work. It's above the level of the table. And like I said, if I want to, and if it's not raining, which it often is up here in the Northwest, I can bead outdoors. I don't even need an electric lamp. I mean, if this is like as low tech as it gets, you know, if I wanted to be absurdly at the wildly eco-friendly, I could make a piece with nothing but vintage beads, and I could claim that I'm, you know, not causing whatever environmental damage. But there are enough beads in the world that you could really, you wouldn't have to produce a single more bead more, and you could still stay busy for the next 20 years with what you're doing. And when you're outdoors, you can hear the bird sounds, which is nice. And again, you know, beads around the world, I think the original beads were shells that happened to have a hole ground into them by the tides or whatever. And because honestly, the last I heard, the oldest beads in the world were discovered in a cave in somewhere in Morocco, perhaps. And they were made out of shell. And they're about 80 to 100,000 years old. So they're durable. The stories they tell, we might have to extrapolate the stories. We might not know, we might never know the exact stories, but you know, they're the first form of money. You know, it's a lot easier to not lose a coin if it has a hole through it and you can string through it. It's on a string. These primary color, this yellow, this green, and this red, is a bead made possibly in Czech Republic or Bohemia that was made to imitate a shell bead. And so many, you know, the term rhinestone refers to imitations of the literal rhinestones, which were crystals, you know, natural crystals that are naturally occurring in the Danube, or the Rhine, not the Danube, the Rhine River. So many, you know, basically glass is often started out as an imitation of natural materials, and it went from there. The one in the middle is a Cynthia Toops bead made out of polymer clay, and it's a mosaic. It is a bead. I confess this confetti thingy is actually an earring and not a bead, but it's a cabochon. And oh, here's another Cynthia Toops up here in the top left. This again, this long lozenge bead is glass that's meant to imitate carnelian. This actually is amber. These are clay. You can make a bead out of just about anything. You can see these, that is a seed. I don't know, like a peach pit, something like that. That's a seed. You know, anything that'll last. Paper obviously can be done. Porcelain. Howard Newcomb is making these beads in the late 90s by his own invented process, which is really interesting. So really, you know, I'm not going to hammer it home too many more times, but anything with a hole in it, you guessed it, a bead. Sometimes I'm wearing this necklace right now, the one that is pictured in the photo. Sometimes I think, oh my God, I stepped over the line. I made beads that people are thinking, I made something people are going to think are ugly and scary. Well, I wore this necklace once on a sculpture park tour with a bunch of strangers. I knew a couple people in the group, and it was apparently not a problem. A little old lady, literally with white hair, came up to me and told me it looked cute. So I'm not scaring little old ladies. Here are more pieces that are just what if, I call them finish your plate pieces. If you have done beading, or if you know beaders, they'll have a term called bead soup, which is leftovers or things that got mixed together and you haven't had time to put them all away and separate every single bead out. Well, it's not worth your time to separate every single bead out and put them back where they went. Why don't you just let them stay together and take up the challenge of doing something with them? and maybe not worrying about what it looks like when it's going to be done. Because what happens is, I've noticed this several times, when I'm a third of the way through something, I'll be going, this is butt ugly. What was I thinking? Then I just put that out of my mind. I keep going, and about 2/3 or 3/4 of the way through, it starts to cohere, and I am not, kicking myself for doing what I did too hard. These are, again, more what if things. Finish your plate and what if, and things that haven't gotten into something yet. But when you do that, you open more doors. And again, it's that connection thing. You open more avenues for connection. Connection's important. I mean, we literally can't live without it. Now, if you want to twist my arm hard enough, I can be tasteful. Believe me, that is something I did. And I've even sold these. I've sold this earrings and this gold finish and other finishes. What I often do, and this is the same element, same technique that went into the bangle bracelets, the colorful ones from the geometric thing. What I'll often do is I'll teach people if people want to learn how to make something tasteful, I'll teach them how to do that. This is the same technique as I used in the post-atomic bell pulls, just done with different beads and tastefully, maybe tastefully. Okay, enough of the tastefulness. This is the back of a head of a work in progress. This is the front of the piece in progress. It's not completed yet. However, I think what I'll do, it's almost life size. It just about almost fits over my face. I think I'm probably going to simply fill it in with enough material that it can stand up on its rest upright on its own, and just call it a sculpture. I'll let you know how it goes. And again, this is improvisational peyote stitch. I use shaping techniques. I just keep going until it's done. I make the cheeks I made separately, just as I made the back of the head. The little chin I made separately, and then I integrated into the rest of the piece as I went. This piece was inspired by a friend telling me about the petroglyphs in the Columbia River Gorge. Back in the day, maybe 6,000 years ago, there was a chieftainess, a female chieftain, who was tricked into turning into stone by Trickster Coyote. And her eyes are still watching over her people as we speak. So that, and if you look up "She Who Watches Columbia Gorge," you'll get the backstory on that. I happen to have these little tiny 2-hole vintage nailhead beads, they call them, and I thought, I want to use those. They'd make really cool eyes, and the rest is history. This is a piece about commemorating a lady, and this is back to more serious stuff here. A lady named Momina Bibi, who was killed by a drone bomb in 2012 when she was picking okra in her garden for her grandchildren. I read about it. Her grandchildren came to Congress to testify, and not every member of Congress even showed up to hear their testimony, but they were basically saying this woman was executed without trial for the crime of picking okra in her garden. So I thought, it's a horrible story, but I want to make something hopefully beautiful with it. There's some unopened okra and some opened up okra. Another piece that came about more recently that happens to be right behind me there is called Reach. During the pandemic, we couldn't hug each other, a lot of us that wanted to. So I thought I'd depict that in beads. The one side has hands going up, the other side has hands going down that are a little looser. Maybe that was a subconscious desire for the idea that we would get to move about more freely later. And this is how it turned out. The left-hand side, right hand as you're wearing it, has layers of hands that actually overlap. So you can lift that and feel underneath the hands. One thing about these necklaces, neck pieces that go around the back of the neck, is that they need to be balanced by weight. They can't, otherwise they'll slide. I found the heavier beads, the big beads that I love so much, were making this side heavy, so I had to add to the other side so it would sit right when you wear it. Now here's a connection that's kind of interesting. Back in World War I, people are on the battlefield killing each other every day. They're in trenches, they're sniping, they're firing bullets at each other. And it was around Christmas time, and all these, there's a ceasefire for Christmas, for Christmas Eve and Christmas Day. And these guys, these soldiers, these grunts, as they call them, on the ground, were basically spontaneously just thought, let's just play soccer, with each other. So these are like soldiers that had been trying to kill each other the day before, getting together, having a soccer game, trading cigarettes for whiskey and vice versa, and just having a good old time. And they actually got in trouble for it. But they saw the humanity in each other. And that's a connection thing. To the best of my knowledge, they were not wearing beads, but I just want to bring that up because what I love about beads is that it shows connections that go from, medieval Italy to Portugal, to the west coast of Africa, to South Africa, to beads that were traded in the Americas. Lewis and Clark would not have made it to the west coast, or to the west coast, if they didn't have beads. They would have starved. They would have not had anything to trade with the local people who could get them food. And if those people if they didn't have the right beads, they weren't going to feel sorry for them and take them anyway. They had to have beads that they wanted. So the connections, the explorations are vast, and the implications of that are vast. And what I like about, that's probably what I like about beads the most, is that these connections are tangible and real. And, back in, 1917 or whenever this was, somebody actually snapped a photo of these guys playing, playing soccer together, not disobeying orders, and actually treating each other as human beings. So yeah, liberation, what can I say? Beads have been liberating for me. I think they've been possibly the medium of, even if it's just a hobby that keeps you sane. My joke is that the medium of seed beads will either drive you crazy or keep you sane, right? So I conclude with that. For some reason, I decided to be tasteful again, but I hope you enjoyed this. I deeply appreciate your interest in it, and I'll welcome comments and contact through my website if you so choose. Thanks a lot, you guys.